Vanessa, and in this episode, I want to talk about why office culture isn't safe for Black women. I know that statement is going to evoke a wide range of reactions and responses. A few weeks ago, I was scrolling through social media and I came across an article with that title written by Lola Christina Allow. And of course, it grabbed my attention. And after reading it, I felt that it really encompassed a lot of feelings that I had um, over the last 18 years of my career, especially when I was working in the office. So in 2020, YouGov did a poll to gauge the sentiment of office workers in regards to returning to the office post COVID-19. And I'm sure it would come as no surprise to many of us that 57% of office workers who took this survey indicated that they did not have a desire to return to the office full time. And furthermore, 39% of office workers surveyed said they didn't want to return to the office, period. So that obviously signals there's a shift in terms of what employees are looking for with flexibility in the environments that they're working in. But this is where intersectionality becomes really important, because when you layer in things like race, you find that those numbers are even more astounding. So there was a study done by this group called Future Forum, and 3% of Blacks professionals that were surveyed in regards to their sentiments around returning to work indicated they have no desire to return to the office full time, as compared to 25% or 21% of the white professionals that were surveyed. So there's a huge disparity there. There's a huge variance in terms of by race, how people are feeling about returning to the office. So why is this the case? Why do we see this huge gap in terms of sentiment? Well, first, I want to speak about more generally about some of the reasons, and then I'm going to share my own personal experience and what went into me not ever wanting to return to an office environment again. So a lot of what I'll be going through, I'm sure there are other marginalized groups that can relate, but I really want to center my dialogue today around Black women in particular, because they're often overlooked. But we are less likely to feel included in office settings due to a variety of reasons. I think one of the biggest things is cultural assimilation. So you may have heard of a term called code switching, where literally we have to change the language that we use in order to be perceived as professional. There are a lot of aspects of a Black woman's identity that historically have been deemed as unprofessional, whether it be the way that we choose to wear our hair, how we dress, how we speak, or even our bodies themselves. These things have been seen as unprofessional. And so there's a burden on Black women in particular to assimilate into the dominant culture, which in the United States, in a lot of offices, is very Eurocentric and is focused on the dominant white culture in terms of what gets defined as being professional versus what doesn't. There's also working in an office, you are more likely to be exposed to, racism and sexism, whether it's directed at you or you just happen to overhear somebody expressing their racist and sexist opinions. It's amazing what you'll hear in an office and what people feel comfortable saying in these types of environments. And these sorts of things wear you down over time. And I think people tend to forget that view racism as a spectrum. So when I was at work, I often would remind people that it's not always going to be in your face. It's not going to always be the KKK burning across in somebody's yard. There's a lot that is overt, sort of under the water, if you will. And that's a lot of what I experienced in the workplace myself. Um, in other sort of BIPOC Black cultures, work life and personal life are separate. And there could be many reasons to that, including just sort of the priority that that culture places on things such as like working outside of the home, outside of the community. But also, a lot of it is a defense mechanism in terms of protecting ourselves from judgment, from racism, from sexism. I know that I did that. I practiced that a lot throughout my early career in particular, where I was very adamant about keeping my work and personal life very separate, because I knew that even the tiniest bit of information could be used against me. And so I experienced a wide variety of aggression and trauma throughout my career, but I want to focus in on a few stories in particular that I think really will hopefully help you viewers understand why I, as an individual, as a Black woman, don't feel safe in office culture. So throughout my entire career, I was often the only Black woman, the only Black person on my team, in my area, or in my department. So that wasn't uncommon. And I felt that isolation even more as I moved up the ranks, so to speak. I became even more of a unicorn, if you will. And so that those feelings of like I don't belong increased over my career. They didn't get better. I worked for a company that was based in, Minnesota. So I'm sure you can imagine what the demographic of Minnesota looks like. And then I live in New Hampshire. So predominantly white spaces. And a lot of the policies and experiences were influenced by the fact that the company was based in Minnesota. That really trickled its way down in terms of expectations, again, how things were defined as professional, or how things were defined as, behaviors that will get you ahead in the company. That played a huge role. I never at any point had a manager that was Black or a person of color. Never. In the whole 18 years I worked for that company, I never worked directly for a person of color, which is very telling, I think. So at no point did I feel like any of my managers really understood that aspect of my identity and how it shapes my experience as an employee, and how it really impacts my ability to show up daily. I think if you were to probably talk to some of my former colleagues when I was working in the office, some probably might express surprise over, the way that I feel like I never felt included. They may say things like, well, it seemed like she was happy or content, and things of that nature. And what I would say to that is, I was assimilating. I was masking the entire time. And that took a great deal of my energy to do that. So, it impacted the way that I talked, the way that I dressed, the way that I interacted with people, the things that I expressed interest in, all because, I wanted to be perceived as professional. And while there were no explicit or overt sort of written requirements, I got signals every day in terms of what was acceptable versus what wasn't, whether that be how somebody reacted to me or feedback I got informally or through performance reviews. I got a lot of messages that said to me, Vanessa, it's not okay to be who you are. It's not okay to bring in aspects of your culture and identity as a Black woman. So there was one time early in my career where I was young, I was about 20 years old. I decided that I wanted to dye my hair blonde. And I remember that first day that I went into work, I went into the break room, and there oh, somebody that was in the break room said to me, "Oh, look, it's Scary Spice." And so I know right now some of you guys are probably like, well, it's a compliment. She's a beautiful woman. And I can tell you right now, it was not a compliment. This person was laughing in their hand and making little looks at the people sitting around them. And they did it to bring me down, to make me feel insecure about my appearance. So I would always get comments on my hair, especially when I chose to straighten it. So my hair is naturally curly, and at times I would choose to straighten it. And I would always hear, "Oh, I like better when you wear your hair straight," or, things of that nature. And again, some of you may say, or think that that is harmless. It's not, when you're constantly getting messages that your natural state isn't as good as your altered state. And so I know some people are probably wondering if I felt more included when I was around other women. And I would simply say that sometimes, obviously it depends on the individual. A lot of the toxicity and trauma I experienced in the workplace was at the hands of white women. So it's not as simple as, well, find someone where you do have some commonality, maybe your gender, and that will help you feel like you belong more. That's not the case. As a matter of fact, sometimes I feel like I have less in common with a white woman than somebody from any other group. So I think that's important to recognize and acknowledge as well too, that sometimes people who we should expect to be our allies, right, under the whole premise of women supporting women, oftentimes end up acting as gatekeepers. So once they achieve or obtain some power, what my experience was is they then turned around and acted as a gatekeeper to that power, instead of turning around and helping lift up somebody who was even more marginalized than themselves. I remember, again, when I was in the office, another supervisor, a white woman, commented on my body. She was making comments about how, like, asking things like, well, what sort of exercises do you do to get the shape that you are in? Again, I did not take this as a compliment. There's a long history of the bodies of Black women being overly sexualized. So to me, it made me feel deeply uncomfortable to hear that, and to be exposed to those comments and to those questions. Another prominent thing that would happen in the office, so I worked in the call center at this time, we would often get calls from people who spoke more than English, had a non-English accent, and the customer service reps would get extremely frustrated with them, put the customer on mute, make comments about whether it be the calls we're getting from India, or sometimes they would just raise their voice as if that's going to help the caller understand them better, for them to understand the caller better. It would just be wild. And there were times where I would go up to that customer service rep and ask them to put the caller on hold or on mute, and be like, you can't treat our customers that way. You don't treat somebody that way. But again, that's a symptom of, there was a lot of closeness within the population of the department at that time. They weren't as exposed to their culture, so they really struggled with interacting with non-white people, I'll say. Another time we had done this really big reorganization in the department. People moved teams. One of the women that was moved to my team was unhappy about it, took to social media and made a comment that now I report to the biggest bitch in the building. And nothing was done about that. Really, the burden was put on me to rise above, be the bigger person, all of that, and just act as if nothing happened with that individual. And that was deeply, hurtful to me. I do think that some people perceived me that way because I didn't put up with, stuff. And that, I do think, comes down a little bit to probably mostly race, but also a little bit to my age. I think people did not feel comfortable taking direction from a Black woman, but especially a young Black woman at that. And this didn't magically go away once I started working from home. So I don't want people to think like the magic solution to all of this is to just allow people to, you know, work from home. That's more of a yes and situation. So yes, do that, but there's also other things that need to be done in order to truly have an environment where everybody feels like they belong. But some of the experiences I had working from home included, you know, one time I was on a all hands call. So everybody in the department was on this call, and a director, a white woman, I don't even know how this came up, but she made a comment about driving in the ghetto with her do-rag on, and she just thought it was the funniest thing. Meanwhile, even, you know, luckily this was before video, I'm at home and I'm shocked. My jaw dropped, and I'm just like, am I in the Twilight Zone? Because how is this okay? Nobody's going to say anything to this. And I remember afterwards following one up with the very few other Black people in the department and being like, that was so wild. And it really just showed that, like, to me, it was just another thing that eroded at my faith in the company and in there being a fair and equitable process for who gets to advance. Because to me, that's a huge gap in that person's development. They may have all of the degrees that you can get, but they can't even recognize and be self-aware of damaging comments like that. You know, another time it was around the Olympics when they were in Brazil, and you know, people love their icebreakers. So on this call that I was on, the icebreaker was, what are you enjoying most about the Olympics? And I personally do not watch the Olympics. I'm just not really into sports in general, but it's just not something that I've been interested in since I was a child. So I was like thinking like, what am I going to say? But what I had heard about the Olympics was the huge disparity in terms of, here you have an obscene amount of money that has been spent on creating this venue and bringing people there for entertainment purposes. And you contrast it to the people who live in that area who are, you know, living in favelas or basically shacks and don't have access to basic needs. And so that's what I commented on. It was like, you know, to me, it's a way of seeing the huge disparity in terms of, you know, wealth there. And once I said that, it kind of felt like all the air had been taken out of the call. And that wasn't my intent, but was based on my perspective and my experience. Meanwhile, everybody else is talking about like, they like this event, the opening ceremonies, stuff like that. And I'm just like, I can't relate to these people. I can't understand how you can overlook all of that suffering and focus on the shiny, you know, sort of object. But that was very frequent as small talk and things, you know, were happening. After George Floyd's murder, I was on this project call, and the facilitator started off by doing a check-in, which I think was, you know, appropriate. There was a lot of feelings, you know, going on. So they just kind of were like, how are people feeling about things? Unfortunately, two of the directors, one, a white man and a white woman who were on the call, instead of focusing on the fact that a human being was murdered by an entity that is allegedly there to protect and serve, and that this was done in broad daylight in front of other human beings. It was captured on tape and then played internationally. Instead of focusing on that and the long history of how this has been happening to Black people in the United States, they chose to center their own feelings and talk about, one of them was saying something about how their nephew was in Antifa and he needs to go get a job. And the woman was saying about how her husband was a truck driver and she's worried for him because there have been reports of people dropping things off of bridges. And none of that stuff had been substantiated. It was a bunch of misinformation to really demonize the reaction, the very valid and justified reaction to George Floyd's murder. And I was pissed. I was angry. It took everything in me not to say something and to just drop that call. But again, I've been conditioned. I can't say something because I'll be that angry Black person. I'll be that angry Black woman who's always taking things too personally, who's always making things about race. And so afterwards, I actually during the call, I put myself on mute. I burst into tears. I was IMing with another person that I happened to be close to that was on that call. And I was just telling her how it was like very triggering to, hear that sort of, discussion and stuff. And those people probably just went about their day, not even, again, lacking the self-awareness to know how hurtful their comments were. I think the theme for probably, I would say the last, 5 to 7 years of my career there was gaslighting, which is really just having your reality denied. So as I would express things to people who were in positions of power to either change or influence change, I was often told, no, that's not true. That's not what's going on here. No. Just making me feel like I was in my head. But I knew it wasn't just me, because I would talk to other Black women who were experiencing literally the same thing, different areas, different companies within the business, etc. So there was a large amount of gaslighting going on. I mean, I was looked over for promotions. Meanwhile, new team members who would join the team would be brought on at a higher salary grade than me. And then I would coach and onboard those people. Again, those are just some of the things that I experienced over an 18-year career that really, to me, show why office culture is not safe for Black women. So again, you think about these things being experienced every day over a period of time and how that wears on somebody mentally, emotionally, and physically. And so you might be asking yourself, well, Vanessa, how do we fix these things? And my honest response to you is, well, you'll have to pay me for the emotional labor and the time that would take me to give you sound advice on how you do that in your own workplace. But I do have words for my fellow Black sisters, Black women out there. And that is to know that you are not making this up. What you're experiencing is very, very real. And I encourage you to find community, whether that be in your work or out of your work, to connect with other Black women so that you have a way of refilling your cup as it gets drained from being in these spaces that are not currently designed for us. I am also here and I'm available if you just like to talk and vent about some of the things that you have experienced or might be experiencing. Also, if you'd like, any advice that I have to offer on how do you navigate these things. I know we often don't have the privilege and power of setting boundaries in the work environment, but I have learned ways over time of how you can do this without, again, putting yourself in a harmful position of maybe being perceived as that angry Black woman. And I'd love to share those with you. So reach out to me, hit me up. I'm also going to be dropping links to other articles around this topic that really talk about this from a broader lens of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in office environments. That'll be in my link tree, which I'll include in the description of the video so you can access those. I want to hear your thoughts on this topic. Feel free to sound off in the comments below or send me a message. Until next time, take care.